Hi, I'm Skip Norris, Jazz Artistic Director for the Music Hall for the Performing Arts Center in Detroit, and you're listening to Detroit Jazz Stage.
Welcome to Detroit Jazz Stage. I'm Rodney Reeves.
And I'm Jim Gallert. This month on Detroit Jazz Stage, we welcome alto saxophonist, educator, and Ann Arbor native Alex Graham. Graham's new CD on the Origin label will be premiered on this podcast. His sextet will perform selections from the CD at Music Hall's Jazz Cafe in Detroit on February 1st. Alex, welcome to Detroit Jazz Stage. It's a real pleasure to have you here. We especially like people from Detroit and the Detroit area who stop by to visit us when they're in town. And you're a pretty busy guy. I mean, you're now living in Rochester, New York. Is that right?
Well, not quite. By the way, thanks for having me here, Jim.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. Well, I was living in Rochester, New York, and now I'm actually living on Mackinac Island, where I'm the music director at Grand Hotel, and trying to finish up my doctorate at the Eastman School of Music.
What do you do in Mackinac, on Mackinac Island? I mean, we just had a huge snowfall here.
Well, actually, on Mackinac, the more snow, the better off you are, because there's no cars on the island. So the only way to get around in the winter is on a snowmobile. So you need snow. And if you don't have snow in the winter, you're kind of stuck.
Do you find that the atmosphere up there inspiring? I mean, the fact that there are not many people and that I would imagine it's quite tranquil.
It is, and it is very inspiring. There's nothing better than to sit in my studio and work on my piano. You can't hear anything. There's a certain kind of silence on the island, especially in the winter when no one's there and everything's covered in snow and you just could hear a pin drop. So I like that about the island in the winter.
Yeah, that's interesting. You have something in common with another alto-playing flute player, and that's Larry Nazzaro.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure. Did you ever know Larry?
I did. I actually studied with Larry at Wayne State when I was getting my master's degree.
Oh, that's great. He said something similar to what you said, so I think you'll agree. He said, I arrived on Mackinac Island for the first time in the spring of 1980 and encountered the nostalgic tranquility that some dreams are made of. Grand Hotel, in its natural setting and elegance, seemed to seize my spirit and give it a new life.
Mm-hmm. He was the music director there for about 3 years in the early 1990s. He had gone up there. And that's before I knew him, or even knew anything about Grand Hotel, or besides just knowing that it was a tourist destination in northern Michigan. And so, but I met Larry in, I think it was 2003 when I started at Wayne State to get my master's degree when I went back to school. And he was one of the sweetest guys I ever met, and a great player, and had a lot of great advice on playing and how to play. And one of the things I always remember he told me is quoting Stan Getz. And he told me that when he met Stan Getz, Stan asked him, have you learned how to edit yet? Meaning, have you learned how to cut out all the unnecessary notes from your playing and just to play only what needed to be said and nothing more? And he always took that as the highest advice. And that I still have that. I still carry that with me from Larry.
Now, you grew up in Ann Arbor.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the music scene like there when you were growing up?
It's actually really good for a town the size of Ann Arbor. And, in Ann Arbor, everyone's real confident about being from Ann Arbor. It's a very heady place, and with the university there. And I was lucky. I went to a high school that had small jazz groups, small jazz ensembles called Community High School, which you guys may have heard of. And got to play. I was playing in quartets and quintets since I was in 9th grade, and getting that experience and also getting out of the community, because the band director there, Mike Grace, does a really good job of getting the bands to play out in the Ann Arbor community. And so I ended up meeting a lot of musicians in Ann Arbor, a lot of professionals, and got to know a lot of the people, a lot of good players there, and a lot of good things happening there, still to this day. So,
what were you listening to at that time?
I started listening to the first jazz record I had was my sister, and I was so lucky that she knew that this was a good record. She had a compilation of the classic Miles Davis Prestige Quintet sessions.
Oh, yeah.
And as soon as I heard that, I just went crazy for it. And I was in junior high school at that time, and then I moved on to, somebody told me I should get a Coltrane record, and I got Giant Steps, and I should get a Thelonious Monk record, and I got a live Thelonious Monk record, and just kind of went from there. And then somebody told me I'm an alto player, so I should listen to Charlie Parker, and that's when I really kind of went crazy. So.
Seems like Coltrane's a big influence on you, obviously, through a couple of the albums. As a matter of fact, you have a song that I think you probably count out like this: 4, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Right.
Which one is that?
The new one from the new record.
And that's Rocket Science.
Yeah, Rocket Science. Well, I was working on Coltrane changes, and I was also working on 12-tone rows for a while. And it came up, I was trying to find a way to make some 12-tone things work over regular Giant Steps changes, and I couldn't find a way. I'm sure you could if you tried hard enough, but just for kicks, I started taking the Giant Steps formula backwards, which is to say, Giant Steps goes, the tonal centers move down in major thirds. So I decided I was going to try to move up in major thirds, which would be if you're in the key of C, C major, B7, E major, E flat 7, A flat major, G7, back to C. And I found some great 12-tone patterns that worked over that progression, and that's how the song kind of came into being. I kind of was riffing on that, so then I had to practice the actual changes as well, which was kind of interesting. I think there are a lot of different patterns that come up when you do it that way. So
yeah, it's shocking to me. When I first heard it, it was unsettling, and I really didn't want to listen to it because, as a pianist, I know how harmony's supposed to be, and it was purely retrograde. There's never you don't sit there on a chord and feel good about it for a while.
Right.
Then I started thinking, well, if it's unsettling to me, okay, think about people like Schoenberg. That's a name that came to mind. People like even Farouk Zibay. People that disturbed people and caused them to think. So is this an experiment or a new way of looking at harmony that you're going to carry on with you, or is that where it ended, do you think?
I'm not sure about that. It's hard to say. It was an experiment. It's definitely an experiment. And there's some other 12-tone writing I experimented with on this record, which we did an arrangement of All the Things You Are. I did an arrangement of All the Things You Are that had an extended 12-tone solely in it. And so that aspect of it may be something I'm going to keep looking into and keep exploring. The backwards Giant Steps thing, maybe, Coltrane did it pretty great forwards, and it doesn't, to me, after I hear it enough and play it enough, it starts sounding the same as doing it forwards, in a way.
Right.
And so I kind of think that as fun, interesting as it was to do an experiment with it, maybe it's definitely not something to build a concept on, or just something to try out. And hopefully get like you said, a powerful effect from it.
Right, and it was.
So you're looking for a concept, then. I mean, is that, I guess I'm leading into a question about style in jazz and an individual sound and how, some musicians like Miles Davis sort of started off with not much of a whole lot of sound, but and had awkwardnesses, as Ira Gittler put it. But then the awkwardnesses, he managed to shape everything into a new sound, a new style. And sound, do you see your own development in those terms?
I think at this point, I used to think that when I was a lot younger, I would, and I think a lot of younger players tend to do this. They find that one weakness. They think it's their one weakness they have. They say, if I can just get that together, I'm going to be cool. And then you kind of get that together, and then you find it. And then I'm just at the point in my life where I realize there's not one thing. If you're going to be a great player, like Coltrane or Miles or a lot of the great players out there today, you have to have all of those bases covered. There's not one thing that you just need to do. And so I kind of, at this point, find myself trying to get a hold of all of those things. In other words, I'm not necessarily looking for a new concept or I'm just trying to understand the basic concepts of what makes good music good, and then play and see what evolves from there.
Did you listen to a lot of, say, Miles, for example? We're talking about Miles. What about On the Corner or Bitches Brew or anything like that?
I've listened to those records. I haven't spent a lot of time with those records, though. They're not primary influences on me, but I like those records, and I think that they're important.
Were there other, what we might call pop music, that musicians like Prince or...
Well, I've listened to a lot of, the Beatles and a lot of the 60s bands, and not so much after that, James Brown, some of those kind of stuff, which I guess you wouldn't technically call pop, but it is popular. It is a form of popular music. And that kind of thing, 70s funk, I've spent time getting into those kinds of records. But I think that good pop music to me has a sensibility that any good music has a good melody, and the melody has a good form, and it works in those kinds of levels. And I think that you can apply, if you find a good pop song or what have you, you can apply that to jazz, or you can apply that to what you do, hopefully.
Your song Pig Pig is a really funky, kind of modern funky blues. And the groove reminds me actually a lot of the bop culture stuff that Mark and Rick Rose
Cool.
did. Yeah. Maybe that's because Rick Rose also on that CD, but my question is, what role does the blues have in your musical development?
I'm not a guy who's listened to a lot of blues, like Blind Lemon Jefferson or something like that.
Right.
But, Charlie Parker was a huge influence for me early on, and I think I tried to assimilate the way he approaches blues vocabulary into my playing, hopefully. And a lot of hard bop guys that I've listened to over the years, like Hank Mobley and Lee Morgan, and not necessarily Alto players at all, who had such great blues vocabulary. And when I'm teaching, I always try to preach that when, as you guys know from being musicians, when you're young, one of the first things you learn about is blues, like the blues scale.
Sure.
And then you start learning some other kind of more intricate ideas and techniques about harmony, and we tend to kind of look down on that as that's just the blues scale or whatever. But I've really discovered that the blues vocabulary that these players have is very deep and intricate and involved, and it's one of the things that I think a player in this day and age, you really have to have that in your playing. You really have to know that vocabulary. So in that sense, that's how I feel about the blues,
listening to your playing, thing that strikes me is a lot of guys that go through the whole college thing, they end up really assimilating the bebop sound and the blues sound, the more traditional sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And listening to your albums, that's there, but you're doing what's now. I mean, put your thing next to Kenny Garrett, and it wouldn't sound out of place. So how do you think you became such a modern sounding player? Was that a conscious effort, or was that everything you were listening to, or how did it happen?
That's a good question. I think I spent a lot of time actually listening to Kenny Garrett and Steve Wilson, who's somebody I'm friends with, who I got to study with in New York a little when I lived there, and I think that has bled into my playing, definitely, even though my original influences are definitely more traditional. Kenny Garrett's first record on Crisscross was from like 1984, and I used to listen to that record constantly because it had standards on it. It had really standard kinds of changes, and he was doing something different with it, though. And that's what I think, to me, when you talk about developing a style or a sound or what have you, I think there has to be this. That's the point of standards, is that's because everybody knows how the standard sounded before you played it. They've heard all the versions or whatever, and that's your chance to have a contrast to that, the way you do it. And that's what the great players have done in the past, is they've taken a normal kind of thing, or a common kind of thing, and they've made it uncommon somehow.
It's interesting that you do a Tadd Dameron tune, who's one of my favorite composers,
mm-hmm.
and talk about poetic beauty of music. I mean, Tadd Dameron.
It's incredible.
Few composers can touch Tadd Dameron. And what do you have other pieces by Tadd that you play?
I used to play a lot of his tunes back in the days when I first got out of college, or when I was in college in New York at the New School. I got really lucky and got a regular gig at a club on the Lower East Side, and I got a pretty good band together to do the gig every Wednesday, and we used to do all those Tadd Dameron tunes and arrangements. It was a quintet, and it was Grant Stewart on tenor, Sam Yahel on piano, this guy Joe Strasser is a great drummer. He plays on The Good Life, actually, CD, and a couple of different bass players at the gig. And we used to do all these quintet arrangements, and especially Tadd Dameron tunes, and Coltrane arrangements from the time, and Horace Silver and Blakey and all that stuff. But I haven't done that stuff in a long time, so I can't think of any Tadd Dameron tunes off the top of my head.
Were you doing the arrangements for this band?
Well, a lot of them were just lifting them off the record, just trying to do them exactly from the record. But occasionally you have to make some adjustments, and yeah, we did some original arrangements, some original tunes as well.
Were you composing for that band as well?
A little, yeah, definitely.
And how did you like that? Did that was that when you started composing, when you had this band in New York?
I actually, going to community high school. In high school, I started writing tunes just because there was this environment that was really free and encouraging to find new ways to express yourself. So it wasn't foreign by the time I went to college. It wasn't a foreign thing to me to try writing things and experimenting. But I definitely started once I had a regular gig. That definitely spurred me to write more than I had before, and because it's a chance to try things out, and if they don't quite work, you can always come back the next week and try to make some changes or adjustments.
Yeah, your compositions are really, really, they're intriguing to me.
Thanks.
I like your harmony. I like the modal harmony you use. I like the more modern scales. I hear a lot of whole tone stuff and diminished stuff, even in melody lines. And then what's more interesting to me, or the most interesting to me perhaps, is the rhythmic interaction that you have going on, especially with the rhythm section. It's like one of those stop on a dime rhythm sections. And I think a perfect example of that can be heard on your 1995 album called Countdown,
mm-hmm.
and the song's The Mole People.
Mm-hmm.
And I love this tune.
Thanks.
You do a great solo, and there's Lewis Smith, the great trumpet player, And then our May 2006 guest, a good friend of yours and one of my favorite pianists, maybe in the world, Rick Rowe.
Yeah, Rick.
So let's take the time to check that tune out.
Sure.
Alex, could you tell us about your association with Lewis Smith?
Sure. Well, I knew Lewis from when I went to community high school, and he came in and would do some clinics and workshops with the band. And he actually did some trips with us. We went to Russia. That was one of the more memorable trips we made, and he was. They looked at him like a jazz god over there, and he had a great time. And Lewis was always great because he knows the tradition so well, and he just really promoted learning the basics, which is something you don't get enough with teachers, telling you, just pounding you with the basics. Make sure you can do X, Y, Z. And he had that influence on me.
Another song that you did that I really like is, and really the only ballad that we have is the 1998 tune, More or Less.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard people say that it was haunting and absorbing. Mm-hmm. And to me, I'm intrigued by the harmony and the voicings from your pianist, Whitney Ash.
Yeah, Whitney. Yeah.
Okay, good piano player.
Mm-hmm.
And then, this might sound strange, but here's what I want to ask you.
Uh-huh.
I was listening to your solo on that piece,
uh-huh.
and it reminded me of a painter, someone like Jackson Pollock, maybe, that might be, just flinging colors and,
mm-hmm.
and ideas onto this canvas. And in the rhythm section is following you, and gradually, it's like chugging along. And
right.
Now it's not a ballad, but now it's sort of like a two feel, a swing feel. And then finally they bring it back down. It's like the climax, and boom, back down for the bass solo.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're soloing,
mm-hmm.
are you thinking like a painter that would explore different textures and colors and emotions and feelings, or more like a storyteller that's telling a story from A to B?
I think in that instance it's more the first than the latter, because I think that song kind of has that atmosphere about it where you need to play it that way. It's not really, you don't need, it's the main thing is to build the energy in that song, and I think that kind of style of throwing things out and maybe having more, going from a place of kind of sparse rhythmic intensity to more and more, kind of lends itself to that tune in general. I do feel, though, in some of my solos, depending on the other songs I might play, where I would like to try to tell a story, as they say, and I think that's a tough thing to do if you're going to really do it right, because it's really about form and coming back to ideas you may have introduced early on in your solo and connecting ideas. It's like composing.
Editing.
Right.
Yeah, editing. Sure. So, and that's kind of a burnout tune, right. Like where we're just going for it and going to try to go crazy. So,
at the end of that song, you do that.
Right.
And there's a little, it's sort of like you open the window a little bit and you're showing perhaps this avant-garde thing a little
mm-hmm.
bit, just a little. But do you ever get a chance to write for larger groups?
Yeah, I do. And that's been one of the great things about doing my doctorate, actually, which I'm doing at Eastman in Rochester, New York, is I've been able to write for a studio orchestra. And I just did something this past year for a studio orchestra, which is basically a full string ensemble with a big band and percussion, full orchestra percussion and a French horn player and, oboe and a couple of orchestral woodwinds plus big band. So that was a very cool experience. And I've written for big band and I'd like to do more if I get the chance.
You'll be taking your new group to music hall, won't you?
Mm-hmm.
And what is the date? Tell us all the details on that music hall gig.
We're going to be doing 3 sets on Friday, February 1st at the Jazz Cafe at Music Hall. And the sets will be at 8, 10, and 12. And the band is myself, Jim Rotundi on trumpet, Steve Davis on trombone, David Hazeltine on piano, Carl Allen on drums, and Rodney Whitaker on bass.
So these are all very, very important people in music. Where are they all coming from? New York?
Yeah, they are, except for Rodney, obviously.
Except for Rodney.
Right, yeah.
Rodney's been doing the Carl Allen, Rodney Whitaker group, though, hasn't he?
Sure, yeah.
And so, and how much is it going to be for the cover for that night?
I think it's going to be 15 at this point.
Okay.
I think that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, well, that's a deal.
Mm-hmm. Oh, to see that band, those guys.
Is there going to be a chance to meet the artists afterwards, perhaps?
I think so. Yeah, I think we'll be hanging out after the show. So come on down.
So you'll be selling your CDs, and we can perhaps get them autographed as well, right?
Absolutely.
In that case, the cover goes up, Rodney.
Right. Now, if some of the listeners want to get a CD beforehand, because this will come out, this podcast is supposed to come out 2 weeks before your hit, actually. Where could we get them?
Well, I'd go to my website if you really want to get them. Go to my website, and there's a contact me link, so you can actually email me. So that'd probably be the best way, because I'm not sure when the label's going to actually have the CDs in hand. But I'm sure probably a couple weeks beforehand we'll probably have them. So if you do that, I might be able to get them to you, because the label wouldn't be able to get them to you probably. Right.
What's your website?
It's Alexander, and then hyphen Graham, which is GRAHAM.com.
Well, Alex, on behalf of all of us, thanks very much for dropping by our little studio here to spend some time and share your thoughts. And
thanks for having me.
And we look forward to hearing you soon at the Jazz Cafe at Music Hall.
Thanks very much. I'm looking forward to the gig. I hope to see you guys there.
Well, hopefully we'll see you there, and we'll also see a lot of the listeners there, because it's going to be a great show. You have great musicians, and the music on this show is really, really, really good. So thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Detroit's favorite new destination for jazz is the Jazz Cafe and Music Hall, 350 Madison in Detroit. Historic, intimate, and elegant with pristine acoustics, the Jazz Cafe is a perfect spot for a memorable evening on the town. Local artists are featured on weeknights, with national acts appearing on most weekends. For a complete schedule, visit musichall.org.
This is Rodney Reeves for JazzStage Productions. If you enjoyed this program, visit our website, jazzstageproductions.com, for archived programs and other interesting jazz material.
Detroit Jazz Stage is produced at Longview Sound in Metro Detroit for JazzStage Productions. Dean Sahutsky is our executive producer. Mark Byerly is our producer and sound engineer. I'm Jim Gallert. On behalf of my co-host Rodney Reeves and myself, good day and keep swinging.